The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the customs post. He said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. While he was at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat with Jesus and his disciples. The Pharisees saw this and said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" He heard this and said, "Those who are well do not need a physician, but the sick do. Go and learn the meaning of the words, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice.' I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners." The Gospel of the Lord. So today we celebrate the feast of the Apostle St. Matthew. A little Bible trivia. St. Matthew also went by another name. Anybody remember what his other name was? Levi. Very good. Yeah, so oftentimes in the first century, Greek was the dominant language spoken in the culture. And yet you had this subset of people called the Jews, and often they spoke Hebrew or even more often Aramaic. Jesus, most likely when he was speaking with his disciples, spoke Aramaic. And so oftentimes you would have a name in Hebrew that you would go by amongst the Jews, and then you would have a Greek name that you would go by publicly. Right? Another famous person in the New Testament is St. Paul. Right? Sometimes we think that St. Paul, his name was changed from Saul to Paul, but actually probably what happened is that Saul was his Hebrew name and Paul was his Greek name, by which he was known in the greater culture. Speaking of Greek, sometimes we have Greek in our Mass. Do you guys know what part of the Mass is done in Greek sometimes? The Kyrie eleison. Very good. Yeah. Man, the washers are on top of this stuff. So, yeah. So, sometimes we say Kyrie eleison, and many people think that's Latin. It's actually Greek, which is really cool, actually, because sometimes in the Gospels, people will say to Jesus, they'll say, "Have mercy on me, Lord." They're literally saying Kyrie eleison. So when we do that at Mass, we're doing what those people did way back in the first century. It's kind of neat, right? It's cool. More Bible trivia. What language was all of the New Testament books, what are they written in originally? Greek, actually. Yeah. None of the New Testament books are written in Latin. They're all written in Greek. Although St. Matthew, he actually originally wrote his gospel in Aramaic. And so the tradition goes. Now, I wanted to talk about that just a little bit with St. Matthew, because I think that's something that he can be relevant for us today. One of the things that is unique about St. Matthew is that he is very intentional in his gospel. Not only does he give a very detailed description of the life of Jesus, the Gospel of Matthew is a great book to recommend to somebody who's new to Christianity or trying to study their faith more. You can tell them, read the Gospel of Matthew. It's a great way to get instructed in the life of Jesus and especially his teachings. Sometimes there's some false conceptions of Jesus out there, and it's helpful to read the Gospel of Matthew. Like, for example, people, sometimes they'll have issues with the church about divorce or annulments. They'll say, why does the church put up such obstacles to people getting divorced, etc., etc.? And you can say, well, look at the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus himself preached against divorce and said you can only marry once. Right? That's why we have these strict teachings on divorce and annulment. So you can always encourage people to read the Gospel of Matthew. But the other reason why the Gospel of Matthew is significant is because, again, Matthew was a Jewish Christian. And his Gospel was specifically intended for a Jewish audience. A Jewish audience which was very well versed in the Jewish traditions and in the Old Testament. And so if you want to understand how the Old Testament is fulfilled in the New, the Gospel of Matthew is a great place to start. And especially if you want to see how the Jewish traditions were fulfilled by Jesus and the church, you can read the Gospel of Matthew. It's very helpful. This is something interesting, something I found out when I was finishing up seminary. I had this idea to write my thesis paper on the book of Revelation. Right? Not a lot of people are big fans of the book of Revelation, and I kind of like conflict. I kind of like controversy. So I thought, I'm going to write about the book of Revelation. And one of the things I discovered in reading the book of Revelation and studying it is that in order to study that book, you really have to understand all of the Jewish traditions. You have to understand what the temple meant to the Jews of Jesus' day. And then it sheds so much light on the book of Revelation. And one of the things that I discovered, which I thought was so cool as being a Catholic, what I learned in studying the book of Revelation and studying the ancient Jewish traditions is that we as Catholics, we are the true inheritors of ancient Jewish customs. Even more so than the synagogue down the street. I don't know if there's a synagogue here in Crawfordsville or not. But if you go to a Jewish synagogue today, it's actually a lot less Jewish than our Catholic Mass. The main reason for that is because in 70 AD, the Jewish temple was destroyed. And so in the Old Testament, so much of the Jewish traditions, they were based on the temple and the liturgies and the priesthood in the temple. You go to a modern synagogue today and you're not going to see a temple. You're not going to see a sacrifice or a priesthood. Unlike at the Catholic Mass. It's kind of neat. Again, one of these great things about being Catholic. We are, in a sense, the true inheritors of ancient Judaism. And in fact, that's the message of the book of Revelation, and that's the message of the Gospel of Matthew. All those ancient Jewish institutions, they have now been replaced by the new temple, which we call the church.